And the second is, moving into section 17, we just wrapped up section 16. The second is government debt. On general principles of law and reason, debts contracted in the name of the United States or the people of the United States are of no validity. It is utterly absurd to pretend that debts to the amount of 2,500 millions of dollars are binding upon 35 or 40 millions of people when there is not a particle of legitimate evidence such as would be required to prove a private debt that can be produced against any one of them that either he or his properly authorized attorney ever contracted to pay 1 cent. Now, reading through Spooner's logic, or through his rationale, we should be familiar with his logic. I think it would be highly entertaining, by the way, if we had a People's Court episode in which someone from the government has to prove that a debt that they incurred as a member of Congress is actually owed by some random stranger that they drag in from off the street. But I don't think we'll get that sort of television. Instead, we get fake elections. So, highlighting some of Spooner's rationale. As with treaties, Spooner bases this on his contention that there is no such thing as the people of the United States to even incur debts in the first place, meaning there's no corporate entity known as such. In the Constitution, the wording is "we the people," and the Constitution is claimed to have created a nation, but the people existed prior to that. Under Spooner, and really just common sense, the people is simply a reference. It's shorthand to describe every individual obligated by that contract. Rather than listing out millions of people, it just says the people. And that was covered in episode 1, in the earlier part of the episode, when he's discussing what the people must mean, considering the fact that it uses personal pronouns. Corporate entities don't use personal pronouns. So it can't be talking about a corporate identity. It's talking about the individual people. No one consented individually to these debts and did not enter into a legitimate corporation that could have also incurred these debts. As such, the people of the United States is a fiction. Fictions cannot own property, which could be used as collateral for a loan. Fictions cannot be indebted. And yet, there are debts, massive sums of money being borrowed with us as collateral. Who created these debts then? Anyone? Bueller? Why, at most, only a few persons calling themselves members of Congress, etc., who pretended to represent the people of the United States, but who really represented only a secret band of robbers and murderers who wanted money to carry on the robberies and murders in which they were then engaged, and who intended to extort from the future people of the United States by robbery and threats of murder, and real murder if that should prove necessary, the means to pay these debts. These debts have no validity, meaning we have no obligation to pay them back. There's your answer for the national debt, by the way. And they have no validity for 8 reasons, besides the obvious one that Spooner mentioned at the beginning of this section, that the people incurring the debts didn't have any authorization to do so. So, these are the 8 reasons that Spooner pulls out. The debts were incurred by a secret band. 2, their agents were selected by secret ballot. 3, the money was borrowed and lent in the dark. 4, the money was borrowed for criminal purposes. 5, these agents have no actual collateral. 6, these agents are bankrupt. 7, they're actually borrower and lender. And 8, if these loans were honest, they would have bound themselves. Excuse me. So, I should have showed that. I thought I did. There, you can see it. Number 1, these debts were incurred by a secret band. There's no honesty and secrecy. There might be honesty and privacy, which actually is a good question you can think about on your own. I'm not going to go into it here, but what's the difference between privacy and secrecy. Number two, the agents were then selected by secret ballot. I would say, good luck going to a bank and trying to get a loan under these circumstances. I've been authorized by a certain group of people to borrow. I have them as collateral, and what are they going to want? Proof. How did these people authorize you? Let's see the documentation for that. Well, I don't have that. We got together and we had this thing we called an election, and everyone notated secretly. And see, here's even the piece of paper that has all of the checks next to yes versus no to take out the loan and to choose me as the agent. That's absurd. No bank would ever do that. And yet, somehow it happens at the national level. Point three, the money was then borrowed and lent in the dark, in secrecy. And this leads to point four, is borrowed for corrupt or criminal purposes. A contract under natural law must be just. So therefore, if the people we've contracted with are engaging in criminal activity and borrowing money to engage in criminal activity, i.e. continuing the violation of natural rights that is the U.S. government, then by de facto, it's null and void because a contract can't be used to justify criminal purposes. Even if they were open about their identity because they go around abusing people through the taxation process, and then Spooner would point to something like the Civil War as being their willingness to murder people. I mentioned in, I forgot what episode it was in, but you can come up with your own examples as far as the things that the U.S. government has done over the centuries to murder people that are a threat to its sovereignty. That's criminal activity, which would make the contract, which would make the debt they've incurred invalid. And certainly we shouldn't be held accountable for it. Which leads to point five. These agents who contract this debt have no collateral. Spooner jokes that they might as well pretend to own both major oceans and sunlight and use them as collateral when he's speaking of their claims that all of us give them authority to borrow money on our behalf. So they don't actually have money. They don't actually have land. They don't actually have people to use as collateral, which means, therefore, point six, these agents are bankrupt. And they can only pay the loan by robbing you. Their collateral, then, rather than being something that they have, is their intention to steal from you in the future. That is really what is meant by, we're all familiar with the phrase, the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. What is it other than that? It's kind of a sobering thought to think about. Point seven, they're actually both borrower and lender. Now, this is by virtue of being both the recipient of the funds and then ultimately as the collateral for them. Again, the faith and credit. And this creates a disgusting cycle. Working on my notes for this, my blood was getting pretty heated. They make an individual loan backed by a corporate promise. That is the people. The sole purpose of the loan, ultimately, is to provide excuse for robbing people so they can then pay off the loan. Or really just pay off the interest of the loan since they never pay off the principal. This is why government always grows. This is why it costs $1,000 for a toilet seat or all those stupid anecdotes that we always hear. This is why it's retarded to debate policy with statists, with someone in Congress, right? Oh, write your congressman, I demand a balanced budget. It doesn't matter what economic ideology these people hold to, because they hold to one policy, and that's to steal from you, because that justifies the grift over and over and over again. This is indescribably evil. Money is created, which we all know this. It's created out of thin air, and then it's loaned in a manner that makes them rich. Think about the 2008 bailouts being the most recent example, at least high-profile example. They created billions upon billions of dollars out of thin air, stroke of a pen, strike of a key, whatever it took. That money hits their pockets and all their friends' pockets at the top, and then, there's trickle-down economics. By the time it trickles down to us, it's worth nothing compared to what it was worth with them. And then we are then taxed to pay off the loan and pay off the interest with money that is worth less. And they do this over and over and over. That is why they exist. That is why this entire thing exists, is for this exact grift. So real wealth, your time, your energy, how many people work 2 jobs just to afford, that's the classic case of, the boomers versus zoomers and all that. Sorry, boomers. Sorry, zoomers. Our way of life is destroyed. Families are destroyed because people, in order to just make ends meet, have to get 2 jobs. Now, I'm very blessed. I'm very thankful. My wife has a decent income. I have a decent income. My wife is able to work from home. She's able to homeschool her children. But given the amount of money that we bring in compared to, and then thinking about the way our comfort is, our financial ease of mind is relative. Like if we were making the amount of money we make now 30 years ago, that was like friends of mine that I would consider to be rich. And yet today, and I'm sure many of you feel the same pinch, today it doesn't feel like it stretches as far because of inflation. Because as we all know, the fractional reserve banking system, the way the government does things, every time you borrow for a house, every time the government cuts a check, they're creating money out of thin air and they're inflating our currency. And the entire system is designed for this one grift, to justify future robberies and murders, or threats of murder if you don't pay. If these loans were honest, this is point 8, they would have bound themselves to the loans. And Spooner fleshes this out. He says, finally, if these debts had been created for the most innocent and honest purposes, and in the most open and honest manner by the real parties to the contracts, these parties could thereby have bound nobody but themselves, and no property but their own. They could have bound nobody that should have come after them, and no property subsequently created by or belonging to other persons. But the loans aren't honest. Government spending is not honest because of all of the above. So, in a nutshell, to summarize all of that, government debt is a massive and diabolical scheme in which government agents, who cannot prove their legitimate agency by virtue of the secret ballot, claim to be borrowing money on the behalf of their constituents to help their constituents. Now, due to that secret ballot, they're claiming to be representing something that cannot legally exist, the people of the United States as a corporate unified entity. And given the amount that they borrow, they certainly do not have enough collateral of their own. They have no legal collateral, since fictional entities cannot own land, money, or any other resource that could be used as collateral. So they're bankrupt. But still, they manage to borrow unfathomable sums of money against the full faith and credit of the United States, which is to say their promise of future robberies via taxation, meaning the only way they can borrow is by obligating you and your children and your children's children forever. It's never going to end. Having no collateral besides their promise of criminal gain, they are therefore, in fact, totally bankrupt. This one framework, even more than Keynesian economics, which is usually blamed, at least in modern times, for perpetual deficit spending, and as such would fit perfectly into the controlled opposition dynamic, meaning let's get people wrapped up in a meaningless debate arguing economic systems, Austrian economics versus Keynesian economics, which isn't to say that there aren't valid arguments that can be made in that debate. I personally think Austrian economics has a better description of how economics actually works. But that's irrelevant, because this one framework more coherently explains the ever-expanding size of government, which expands regardless of what little letter is next to one of those agents' names, because they are ever in need of excuses to borrow more money to enrich themselves and their friends and their overlords, and thus are ever in need of increased taxation, i.e., robbing real wealth to pay off the loans or the interest on the loans. There is no benefit for these people to ever actually pay off the loan, because if they did, their whole system collapses. And frankly, their overlords would not allow that. Now, who these sick and twisted and evil minions of Satan actually are, we'll cover next week in section 18. Or not, is 18, yeah. Now, notice, by the way, as a closing thought, that Spooner is writing in 1870, 43 years before the creation of the Federal Reserve. That definitively tells you that what we typically blame on the Federal Reserve, for good reason, is actually a problem much deeper than the Federal Reserve. In one sense, blaming the Federal Reserve is sort of like blaming the gun in the hand of a murderer. Now, don't take that analogy too far and start calling to save the Fed. But the real question is, how deep does this problem go of the government incurring debts in a manner that perpetuates our servitude? The Constitution explicitly states, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 2, that one of the powers of Congress is to borrow money on the credit of the United States. Now, given everything that Spooner has laid out in this section, Section 17, what other conclusion can we reach than this was by design? And with that, I'll see you all next week.
Why a spoon, cousin? Why not an axe?
Because it's dull, you twit. It'll hurt more.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.